Hi, my name is Janine Miller, and I'm a survivor of child abuse. It started in the home, and my parents abused me. They deemed me a rebellious child, all in the name of God. I was an honor roll student. I didn't get into any trouble. I had no criminal record, didn't do drugs, and I didn't drink. I wasn't perfect, but I didn't deserve to be locked down in a reform school. There really wasn't anything to reform. And I feel that my parents took their religious beliefs to the extreme, and they just branded me. They branded me a bad child. But really, it was a whole family dynamic. And I feel that a lot of parents are blaming or singling out one child when really it is a whole family dynamic. And instead of dealing with it, they are just shipping them off to reform schools, boot camps for kids, conversion therapies, and you get the idea, the troubled teen industry. I personally was locked up in an independent fundamental Baptist reform school located in California, and they broke my will. They broke my spirit. Today we have on our show a survivor, and she endured such child abuse in a household that took their religious beliefs to an extreme. Please welcome to the show, Miss Sarah Nicole Bertram. Hi, Sarah. How are you doing? Nice to see you. I like your dress. It's beautiful. I love the yellow dress. So tell me, Sarah, what was it like growing up in the IFB household, Independent Fundamental Baptist? Can you explain to the audience what exactly is Independent Fundamental Baptist?
Thank you. Thank you. Independent Baptist, Fundamentalist Baptist is the churches of it's the Baptist churches, and they've taken their beliefs to an extreme to be the fundamentalist part of it, where they read the Bible literally and interpret it literally, coming up with strange doctrines that most Christians wouldn't agree with. And they use those teachings to enforce rules upon their families, children, that are unhealthy. And the teachings start in the church, and that's what independent fundamentalist Baptists are.
Back up close tonight, our 360 investigation on godly discipline. We've been looking into a network of Christian reform schools that cater to fundamentalist Baptist churches. Now, these group homes for so-called troubled teens can be traced back to Texas radio evangelist Lester Roloff, who founded the Rebecca Home for Girls back in 1967. You may have heard of this. He used a girls singing group called the Honeybee Quartet to promote the home.
The Lord I know ruleth o'er everything, amen, and all of my worry is vain.
And I'm living by faith.
Yes, living by faith in Jesus above.
In Jesus above.
Well, despite the marketing pitch, Roloff's Homes for Girls faced multiple allegations of abuse over the years, and now decades later.
Is there any happy time in your childhood at all that you can remember? Any good memories? Yes.
When I first left home, it was hard for me to think of the happy things, because when I left home, that's when I realized how abusive it had been, because I was seeing other families who were healthier and being able to interact with people in a healthy way. And so it was hard for me to think back to my childhood and think of happy times. But since as time goes on, I'm able to see happier moments amongst all of the abusive things. And that actually makes it harder for me to move on and grow and become healthier, because dividing the unhealthy and unhappy things from the things that were pleasant memories. It just makes it harder to be able to heal from the abusive things.
So there were mixed messages going on in your household, and so there were happy times, and it would probably make you question whether or not you were being abused. I could see that happening. Was there any, were you sheltered pretty much throughout your childhood? And can you explain that?
Yes, it was very hard to tell when rules were enforced and when they weren't. Um, but when I left home, I had never been out in public by myself before. I'd always had my sister with me, my grandma with me, my family with me, all of us, all of my 10 siblings around me. So it was my very first time stepping out in public alone. So that's kind of how sheltered we were. And then we didn't watch movies, so I was clueless as to new things in the world, the pop culture and such. But some of that, it's hard to say that sheltering a child is all bad. I may get into this later, but when you have a child, you want to keep them safe from the evils in the world. There are things that are unhealthy for children, especially at certain ages. And but my example for that is a fence, because when a child is young, a parent will have a fence to keep the child in so that they don't go out on the road and get hurt because they're too young to face those facts of life. But as they get older, it is the responsibility of the parent to take the child out and teach them how to function healthy in the world and stay safe. And if the parent doesn't do that, then they are doing a disservice to their children by letting them just stay in the fence and never teach them about the world outside.
Did you have any friends growing up as a child that you can kind of compare different home lives to, or?
Yes, I had friends who I could talk to, and they had similar issues with family. Some were not as extreme, and some were just as extreme or worse. But the main thing is we didn't talk about the abuse because of family honor. And I don't know for sure, but I believe that most families have a certain family honor, and it can be a healthy thing, I suppose. But when it gets to the point where a child is afraid to talk about a family issue to anyone else because they're afraid of making their family look bad, and so they hide sexual abuse or just mental abuse, physical abuse, any kind of abuse, because they're afraid of making their brother look bad, which would reflect on the whole family. And if they start talking and it gets back to the parents, well, then we would all get in trouble. I remember having some conversations with friends of mine, not about the abusive stuff anyway, but like just my thoughts on something, and they would repeat to their parents, who would tell my parents, and then I'd end up getting in trouble. And so that was always a fear of mine, is that my friends would repeat things to their parents, who would repeat to my parents, and I'd be in trouble. So we didn't talk about stuff, partly because of family honor and partly because we didn't want to get in trouble. So everything was very, very hidden in our families, and we kind of got echoes and ideas of what it was like in the other families, and so we knew there were similarities, but parents ruled, and we believed that whatever the parent said was right. And if we went against that in any way, even in our thought process, we were wrong and disobedient and rebellious.
And I knew that the minute the door shut behind me.
On her first day in this house, which was the facility used back then, Susan says she was accused of having a bad attitude while cleaning the ceiling. So two staff women grabbed her, and Don Williams' father administered what she said was known as godly discipline.
He just bodily manhandled me to the floor, and he hit me with the board as hard as he could. He's a very big man. And I was shocked. I'd been paddled my whole life. I'd never been hit like that.
Were they all IFB that you were surrounded with?
My family wasn't IFB necessarily. They called themselves non-denominational, My dad grew up Grace Brethren, and my mom grew up Presbyterian, and they kind of mashed their beliefs and took what they liked and left what they didn't. And then as they grew in their parenting and in life, they took on teachings from people like Bill Gothard and the Pearls and teachers like that, and they would skim what they liked and they would leave what they didn't, so they could always say, we didn't agree with everything that person said, but they took just enough that it was unhealthy, and it formed what they believed, and it wasn't good. I think that is the danger of being independent or non-denominational, is because you can go so far into things that just aren't healthy, because it leaves the lines are undefined for abuse and other things.
And again, children are to be seen and not heard in this particular community, denomination, if you will. Could you tell us a little bit more about the worst case scenario of what went on in your house? What was the worst experience that you endured living in that house?
Well, after having left and processing things a lot, one of the very worst things that ever happened to me was when I was told that I needed to hold one of my siblings down so my mom could beat him. I felt like that really, really scarred me, because it was it was my mom teaching me how to hurt people and be callous to other people's feelings.
Oh my God.
But the thing that happened to me that hurt me the most was, I remember my mom bending me over the bath, not the toilet, but the tub, and spanking me for I don't remember what. And she spanked me, and then I was trying to catch my breath from crying, and I wasn't able to apologize fast enough, so she told me to bend over again. And she did that maybe 20 times, and she was laughing while she did it. And I was so angry. To this day, I don't remember what she was spanking me for. And I think when you're disciplining a child, no matter how or what you're doing, the most important thing is that they remember what they did, so that they don't do it again. So I don't understand why it is that I was punished so hard that all I remember was the punishment, and I don't remember what the lesson was that I was supposed to be learning. I think that, but the punishment was a beating. It was not discipline. It was very, very uncalled for on my mom's part. And she spanked me until I was finally able to gasp out an apology before she hit me again. And she didn't care if she hit our legs or our back or our hands or anything. She always said, I'm aiming for the bottom, but if you put something else in the way, it's not my fault. And she would just hit and hit and hit as hard as she could all the time.
Michelle Dowling is 20 years old. She just got out of Hephzibah House a few years ago. Her parents thought the strict religious curriculum would make her a better Baptist.
They told me that, it would be good for me and I'd make good life-changing decisions.
Michelle was only 12 and brand new in the house when she says two staff women told her to take off her clothes and forced her into a closet where a man would give what Hephzibah House claims is a medical examination.
They held both my legs and both of my arms down and let him do this to me. He stuck a speculum inside of me, and I was scared. I was screaming, and I didn't want him to touch me, and there was nothing I could do.
Both women talk about being forced to eat a lot of food, sometimes not being given any food, being forced to drink a lot of water. Susan says 28 girls shared 3 bedrooms on the upper floor of this house. There was 1 toilet, but
If I stood up to go to the bathroom, no, you can only go to the bathroom when you're told you can go to the bathroom.
These were the girls you were with.
Right.
What would happen if you go to the bathroom without asking
You would be
permission?
paddled, yeah.
I would wet the bed every single night I was there. They'd make a spectacle of you, like you were this horrible person for doing that there. They'd make a spectacle of you, like you were this horrible person for doing this.
And I know from experience that that was going on in the lockdown reform school that I was in, because it was always the child had no rights. the child was manipulating, the child is a liar, and no one would ever believe us because we were just troubled kids. So we were in a reform school that was for troubled kids, and if we were ever to say anything or make a report, we were conditioned that no one would believe us because we were just bad kids. But even though you weren't in a reform school, that's a psychological twist that was going on with you. The only problem is I was locked up for 8 months, and you were locked up, so to speak, with an invisible barrier for how long? 17 years? 16 years?
It was a month before my 20th birthday that I left. Yeah, the whole police thing is something that often puzzles me in memories, because I remember my brother bullying my little siblings, and I was afraid they were going to get killed. And I would think, why don't I call the police? And the thing is that I was always afraid that if I called, first of all, I would be in trouble with my parents, because my parents would tell us. They would tell us, if you call the police, or if the police come to our house, or child services comes to the house, they're going to take our side. We are the parents. We know what's right and wrong. You don't, so we're always right. But then the other side of it was almost a fear that they were going to divide up our family. So my parents would tell me two different sides of it. First of all, that they were always right and the government would always side with them. And then the other side of it was the government's wrong and they're evil and they're trying to tear our family apart and they're wrong. And these ideas, somehow they used them whenever it was convenient for them, and they really confused me, but it was enough to scare me senseless, and I wasn't going to report anything.
What finally was the straw that broke the camel's back to get out of this?
Well, from when I started pondering leaving, there were ladies who were encouraging me to think through things, and they encouraged me to go to my dad 3 different times to ask him for my legal documents and for his blessing, let's say, to leave, or just his support, whatever that was. And he told me no all 3 times. And one of those times, in a lecture in the car I was driving, he was going on and on because he was angry about that I wanted to leave his protection. And he said, do you think that this is what God wants you to do? And I said, yes, because I was a Christian back then and I really believed that. And he said, well, I can tell you one thing. If it were truly God's will for you, he would have told me first. And so since he hasn't told me that that's his will for you, it's not his will for you, and you need to listen to me and obey me, and you need to change your stubborn, rebellious heart and do what I say. And then after that, somewhere along the line, he said, you're not an adult until I say you're an adult. And that really, really struck me and will forever be what I would say was my reason for leaving, I guess, when I realized that my dad isn't always right. And because I thought about it, and I'm like, I don't read that in the Bible anywhere. I don't hear anyone out besides my dad and the church and families that we know telling me that. And it's not even like the law doesn't say that. The law says 18 is an adult. So like, where's he getting this idea? It's all because he wants to own me and feel like I'm his property. That's the only conclusion I could come to.
Right. And that was the first time you realized that something was not right, which is sad. But I'm glad that you are aware, because acknowledging that you're being abused is half the battle and not passing it down the road. It's the ones that don't acknowledge it, there's a problem, because then you think it's right. And if you think it's right, well, guess what's going to happen to your children? The same thing. If you acknowledge that it's wrong, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to pass it on because you know it's wrong. So a lot of mental manipulation, a lot of control, and it sounds like Stockholm syndrome too, with the mixed messages. Did you ever feel loved in your house?
Yes, but I think that the love was used to control, and I think that's the way a lot of times it is in these families and similar situations. It could be genuine love, and I think that the people who instigate it believe that it is genuine love because I think they've tricked themselves to believe that. But underlying is their own desires to control and manipulate and be own the people that they are loving, supposedly. And I've learned this over a long period of time, not just from my parents, but just observing other relationships in this world and seeing how easily people can trick themselves to believe that they are loving someone, but in reality, that love is selfish and they're using it for their own gain.
But being told you're loved and being felt that you're loved, with my mom, it was like nails scraping up against a chalkboard because her actions spoke differently.
Yes, my mom would try to hug us, and it was always really awkward and weird because that wasn't who she was. She was. In fact, when I was little, I would try to stroke my mom's hair, and she would snap at me and tell me not to touch her without permission and stuff, and that would scare me. And then I was like, whenever she was in a good mood, she'd come up and try to hug us, and it would just be like, "Get your hands off of me! What's wrong with you?" And then when after I'd left home, I remember seeing my mom post something on Facebook like, "Hug your kids often. It's really healthy. I just went around and hugged all my kids, and everyone's in a good mood today." And I messaged my sister and was like, "Are you okay? Like, what's going on with mom?" She posted this thing on Facebook, and Rebecca's like, "I haven't seen mom all day. I don't know what she's talking about." And so it was all like an outward like show. It's a show to make yourself look good. Like, I'm a good mom. I hug my kids. But in reality, it wasn't even a real hug. It was just to make herself feel good, and that didn't make us feel good.
Oh, which brings me to this question, Sarah. What was her childhood like, and was she IFB raised? What's going on there? What was her childhood like? Please tell me.
From what I understand from my uncle, my mom did have a pretty abusive. I know my grandma is very, very much like my mom, so they're very similar. So I could see how she gained a lot of her abusive traits from my grandma, but I don't know. It's a mystery that's probably going to die with my mom because she doesn't talk about her past very much.
I do believe that they took their religious beliefs and to the extreme, like you said. And, you know, religious liberties, fine, but we didn't say to abuse our children. What was going on in your early years in this household with other siblings? You mentioned your brother kind of controlling everything. Is that when you left home? Was that going on while you were there? He was hitting your siblings. So could you tell us a little bit more about that and why he was doing that?
Yeah, one of my brothers is very abusive, and he has always seen himself as the birthright or whatever it is in the Bible, that the firstborn son, and I think he's favored by the parents. Me and my sisters would agree with that anyway, but that could just be sibling jealousy. So my assumption, still, he's very abusive and he gets away with a lot of it. And he would hold the siblings up by their throats when he was angry with them, and fly into temperous rage, throw things at us. And it got to the point where he was almost entertainment for some of the kids. They would poke him and try to make him angry, see what would happen. Because like, when you're that sheltered, what else is there for fun? And he would have good reasons for being angry, but the way he handled his anger was so inappropriate. He needs help, and I don't know if he'll ever get it because he's so involved in the culture of the fundamentalist Christians that he believes that Jesus has saved him and he doesn't need help. because Jesus is everything, and that's what my mom teaches.
Let's go over let's touch base on how the IFB views women and then men, because why did they allow him to get away with this? It has to do with his gender, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay, can you explain that in the IFB community and the IFB denomination?
Yeah, my family believed that the men were the ones who had to make the food, or who had to provide the food, who had to provide the housing for their families, for their wives and their children. And so us girls were seen as like, we were supposed to be the homemakers. We were supposed to learn how to raise children, be homemakers and such. And meanwhile, my brother was taught that, yes, he had to learn some housework in my family. But for the most part, his main goal was to be ready to provide for a family of his own. So he was allowed to get a job and pursue college or whatever he wanted, whereas I was discouraged from that because that's just the gender roles that they have assigned to men and women. And they would have interesting ways of teaching the Bible on that subject to make it sound really good. And I always thought, after hearing a teaching, that, oh my goodness, they know what they're talking about. They have it all online. And they would make it appealing to girls and boys and make the gender roles sound like they were something that we should be seeking if we were desiring to please God and such. But looking back, it was really viewing women as property and giving men the power to rule and abuse.
Can you tell us about, in my experience, based on my experience, women were responsible for rape. Women were responsible if anything went wrong with a man, meaning sexual abuse, rape. If a man hit them, it was their fault. It was the way you dressed, the way you looked, your demeanor. It was something, I felt like I was walking into the twilight zone.
Don Williams is also the pastor at the church on the Hepzibah House grounds. A former churchgoer gave CNN a CD sold by the church, in which Williams is apparently preaching his views about who's to blame when a male whistles at a female.
If you girls are walking down the sidewalk and some fellas drive by and they whistle, you better stop and think about that. What drew that whistle? Was it the way I was walking? Or maybe the way I was dressed or whatever? Did I do something to defraud those men?
I felt like I was walking into the twilight zone. I couldn't believe that these people believed this. Could you go into a little bit more about that?
Yeah, they would. It was very easy to get in trouble as a woman because we had to make sure that we were dressing so that we wouldn't cause our brothers and fathers to stumble. One of the things a friend of mine experienced was my dad went to her father and called her out for immodesty pretty much and told her father, your daughter's making me stumble. And later in life, me and my friend talked and I apologized to her for the horrible thing that my dad did to her then. And but that's just the way it was. Us women were to be homemakers, quiet, submissive, and not make a scene, not dress inappropriately. If we winked at a guy, well, that could be seen as flirting, or it might be not. You never knew. And that uncertainty made it very, very difficult for me as a teenager, especially because I was trying to figure out life and so confused by that I could get in trouble one minute and then not get in trouble the next minute. And you start overthinking every little move that you make as a woman, wondering like, oh, is someone going to interpret this wrong? Is someone going to interpret this wrong? And it was so hard growing up that way.
Speaking of which, can you describe the yellow dress? You were not allowed to wear something like this in your household. And what happened with the yellow dress?
Yeah, so I wasn't allowed to wear yellow because it was seen as a too bright of a color and it would draw men's attention to me, and so I wasn't allowed. And I always wanted a yellow dress because it's such a bright, pretty color, and it was puzzling to me why I wasn't allowed to wear it. And so when I was about to leave home, going to Texas, one of my mothers messaged me and she said, "What's something that you've always wanted that you've never been able to have?" And I said, "I've always wanted a yellow dress." So she bought me a yellow dress and she had it mailed to Texas to meet me there. And I was so happy. And I've kept this yellow dress all this way, and it's one of my very, very special possessions.
How did you get out of that house? Were they not home and you snuck out? Were you afraid? What was going on in your head about leaving home? Because your father wouldn't even allow you to leave on a weekend somewhere. So how did you escape? I mean, you literally escaped from your house.
Yeah. So how it happened was it was very well planned out ahead of time. The ladies who I was in contact with online had a secret code word, and if I messaged that word, it meant that my dad was like locking me in a room or something terrible was happening. So that was our like backup plan, Plan B. But I was supposed to go to my grandparents' house every Thursday to study midwifery with my grandma because my grandma was a midwife. And I went to their house, and my friend was going to come pick me up, and we told my grandparents we're going to lunch, which we did. But then she took me to the airport after that, and I packed all of my clothes in what would have been my book bag, my study bag, and so I left with only those clothes and what I could fit in my book bag. Um, so I dropped my dad off at work and drove straight to my grandparents' house, and then from there I went with my friend Alina to the airport.
How did you get the money did this lady come up with the money to pay for your flight? And how did you get the money? Did you?
Yes, there was a bunch of ladies who they were all homeschool moms, and when they heard about my situation, they really wanted to help, and they put together the money to buy the plane ticket for me to get to Texas, and then from there, they were hoping that I would be able to get a job or figure out a way of supporting myself from there, but they wanted to give me a start, so that was what they came up with.
Oh my goodness, that is so nice. That is so nice of them to do that for you. Um, let's go back into your childhood. I was locked in a facility that was an old FBI facility. It had a 12-foot fence and barbed wire around it. You had no 12-foot fence and barbed wire, and yet you were terrified of escaping or telling someone. You never told social service, I imagine, because it sounds like that was the first person that you confided in. So what was her name, by the way? Or I don't know if you want to divulge that on.
There were a bunch of homeschool moms. They called themselves the Squirrely Moms on Facebook. They were also the Modern Moms group, homeschoolers. And one of those mothers was a good friend of a friend of who was the mother of a friend of mine. And I was really good friends with him, and he introduced me to his mom. We started talking and hit it off, and she became my mom. And then she told the other ladies my story because she was a little nervous because she felt like maybe she was out of place in inviting me to think outside of the box. And so she wanted the support and advice of the other moms in her group. So she would tell them little bits of my story, and they all got on board to rally around me and help me. And so her name was Jen, and there were 3 other Jens involved in my story. And so it gets confusing sometimes. And then there were other ladies.
So you never called social services, you just ran away. Did you try calling social services after running away, or?
Yes, about a year ago, I tried to call, and I told her everything, told the lady on the other end everything that had happened. And she told me that she would make the report, but that she didn't think that anything would come of it because I had been out of the house for so long. and they would have to have someone who was in the home recently making a report for it to take any importance. And unfortunately, I know none of my siblings are brave enough to do that. A little while ago, while I was living here in Indiana, I asked one of my brothers, if the police came to the house, would you tell them everything? And he said, I'd try. So I called the police and asked them to do a wellness check on my brother. And they went to the house, and I think my mom interfered and got to the and was able to convince them that there was nothing going on. And by the time they talked to Seth, he was afraid to talk because, yeah, that's what he told me. He told me there was nothing I could say. My mom just related the whole thing.
Oh my God, that's so sad. You did mention something about your older brother abusing another sibling, that it just got worse after you left. And they didn't see any bruises or anything on the kids? They didn't bother investigating?
No, there were no bruises because when someone walks into the house, you never know if there's going to be bruises, and if there were, they'd be on their bottoms. And I can't imagine a police officer looking at my siblings' bottoms for bruises. One of my sisters did have bruises up and down her legs at one point, but it's on and off sort of stuff that goes on. So you can never know for certain if there's going to be evidence on a certain day. You just don't know that.
So now that you're an adult and you understand what love is and you know what love is, were you loved as a child? Were you nurtured as a child?
My mom would take us out to the garden to talk to us, and she would play it up as if this was a mother-daughter conversation and we were supposed to bond and get close while we were weeding the garden. But in the end, what it turned out to be was her getting me to talk and tell about my life so that she could use it against me later. And that's something that she still does to this day to me, which makes it very hard to have a relationship with her because I keep wondering when's the next time she's going to try to use this against me, because she finds out what I like, what I don't like, and she tries to use that when she wants. She tries to take away what I like and make me do what I don't like so that she has the ultimate control. And that's what she thinks is love. She thinks that loving conversation with her daughter, and that's what it's all about.
Well, you definitely were not respected as a child, and that's the whole theme. This is my point. So what you endured in the home is very similar to what goes on behind closed doors, and not necessarily independent fundamental Baptists, religious programs, and these boot camps for kids, wilderness programs. They could be religious, non-religious, licensed, unlicensed. It doesn't matter. The bottom line is there's a common thread, and the common thread is control. You were not even behind a 12-foot fence with barbed wire, and you felt like you couldn't even escape. And can you imagine what we felt like inside, with no communication? And again, were you allowed to have TV or radio or anything like that?
We had those things in our house, but we didn't watch TV. We didn't listen to the radio for news or anything. The only news that we heard was what my dad told us at dinner time when he'd come home from work, because he was listening to the radio to and from work. And so he would only tell us what his version of what he heard on the radio, and also select bits and pieces. And he always told us, like, there's a lot of evil out in the world that you don't need to be exposed to, so I tell you what you need to know.
Okay, so it was regulated. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. You were sheltered. You really didn't have anything to compare it to, I feel. You were surrounded by IFB, and you couldn't watch TV or the news, and everything was dictated. That's unbelievable. So it was almost like being in the same place I was in, but for 20 years. 20 years. I can't even fathom that. 20 years. That's crazy. I want you to do me a favor. I want to do a little bit of role reversal with you. I want you to close your eyes right now, and I want you to be a parent. of a beautiful baby girl that's in your arms right now, and her name is Sarah Nicole Bertram. And I want you to really think about what you want to tell her right now at this moment as you are rocking her back and forth. Could you talk to her right now? What would you say?
Love isn't what other people tell you it is in this life. It's what you learn it to be. And you've got to understand that you've got to take everything with a grain of salt, because lots of people are still learning what love is for themselves, and they're going to misuse it to try to control you. So just, even though your mom and dad tell you that they love you and they believe that they do, and you're going to want to believe it, just understand that they don't really understand what love is either.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. I love you so much. And thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And what would you tell children if they're in this situation and they feel that they have no way out of the abuse? What would you tell them? What kind of message would you give to them?
I would tell them that there are people out in the world who will help them, and there are people out there who will disagree with them, and that they are individual and they are to be respected as an individual. And that's really the thing that they have to cling to as they sort through what's right and wrong and where they're going from where they're at. Every decision that they make, whether they decide to stay in the abusive environment or leave, is their choice. And I hope that if I were to meet them, that I would be able to show them the kindness and love that they deserve and support whatever decision they decide to make for themselves.
Oh, one more thing is, thank you for that advice. I appreciate that. And could you do me a favor and tell the audience about your YouTube channel? You are eventually going to interview survivors that have been abused in the IFB community. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And where do they need to go?
Yes, my YouTube is Sarah Bertram, and my blog is spuninayellow.wordpress.com is my blog. That's where I've written out a lot of my thoughts from leaving home and everything like that.
Thank you so much, Sarah Nicole, for sharing your story and being brave and sharing with everyone about how to prevent child abuse. I appreciate you. I did incorporate Sarah Nicole Bertram because she is part of the IFB, and I was abused in an IFB community in a lockdown reform school. But again, it's not about religion, it's about control. And many of these children today are being abused. One I can mention is the Hephzibah House. It's open today for business. They have girls in this home, and they are controlling them, and they are in a lockdown. There's no form of communication, and it's been open for over 3 decades. 3 decades. That means that we are consenting to child abuse in this country. Unfortunately, this is not the only one that is open today for business. This is an epidemic that's happening across our nation. Whether religious or non-religious, it doesn't matter. These are teen programs. We're trying to stop the child abuse in these teen programs by providing oversight. Please do your research on Stop Child Abuse in Residential Programs Teens Act. That was reintroduced by Adam Schiff. Please visit that. Also, if you are a parent and you're considering sending your child to a reform school, conversion therapy, wilderness camp, please reconsider. There are other solutions. Jody Hobbs has answers for you. Please visit sia-now.org. Again, sia-now.org to learn more. And you can also donate to survivors. Also, James Swift, who is the author of Rusted Rhinestones. He is helping teens get them off the streets. His website is helpforteens.org. Again, helpforteens.org, and it's the number 4, helpforteens.org. If you are thinking about sending your kid to a conversion therapy, there are definitely other solutions. James has the answers. Please contact him. Please visit my website. It is jeneenmiller.com. Again, JENEEN Miller.com. And you can learn more about what happened with me in a lockdown reform school. I am Janine Miller, and this is Pieces of Victory.
The Hephzibah House is a self-described fundamentalist Baptist boarding school and church for adolescent girls. The allegations are so disturbing, we felt we needed a face-to-face meeting with the father or the son in charge. We found the son in a parking lot.
We've had a lot of people complain that they've been physically, emotionally, mentally abused at your house. Can you give us a comment about that?
Well, I would rather not.